All right, so Energy Transfer recently came out with an open season notice for another Canadian supply project and an egress project teamed up with Enbridge this time. You might remember I did a video a couple months ago on their Big Sky project, which was them potentially teaming up with South Bow. That project looks to be either shelved or on the back burner at this point via comments from the companies. But I did think it would be good. I haven't done a video for a while. We've been working on a bunch of different stuff, but I thought it'd be good to talk about this project. As usual with some of these open seasons, they're short on details. So being able to parse some of those out and then being able to look at how this might impact the midstream companies. Don't think it'll have a hugely material impact to either company, but it's still good to look at the competitive dynamics and look at some of the supply and demand fundamentals across the Midwest and down to the Gulf Coast. So really quick at the structure of this video, I will put an article below this video that'll summarize everything in probably a 3-minute read with some figures. Feel free to read through that. If you don't want to sit through the whole video, you should be able to capture most of my main points. And then I'll go a little bit in depth on some of the supply and demand fundamentals for the Midwest and the Gulf Coast market and the competitive landscape for some of these Canadian egress projects later in the video. So without further ado, let's look at really quick at what was posted to Energy Transfer's tariff website. The open season was very short on details. Really just said open season, 200,000 barrels a day, a new project called Southern Illinois Connector, which would be a joint project between Enbridge and Energy Transfer. And it would offer routing from an international joint tariff from Western Canada to delivery points in the Gulf Coast. Really, that's all it said. Luckily, there was a Bloomberg article published, I believe, this morning, which has some more details and maybe gives us the ability to parse out what they're planning with this project and see what we think of it. So let's dive into it, and I'll switch to the map view here really quick. I put up Enbridge's Mainline, so this is the Canadian Mainline here, into Lakehead, which is their U.S. Mainline. I also added some of the regional oil sands pipelines that they have. So what I think the strategy of this company is, and it's not anything unique for some of the midstream companies, is really controlling the barrel all the way from the wellhead to the demand markets essentially. So that has been Enbridge's really what they've tried to do with their strategy is, hey, we're going to control the barrel and get paid for tolling that barrel all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So we'll dive into what their strategy was and what it was over the last decade and why I think that they're having to team up now and do some joint projects or consider some joint projects with some of their partners. So I'll switch off the Canadian Mainline really quick and we'll just look at the flows that have come in on the Mainline. As you can see, huge amount of flows, over 3 million barrels a day now come in on the Mainline, and it's gone up and to the right slowly over time. And they continue to squeeze more capacity. Now, where did these barrels go to? So a lot of them stayed in the Midwest. Refineries continue to take more heavy crude in the Midwest, but a lot of them went down to the Gulf Coast. So Enbridge's strategy really for the last decade was, hey, let's move more barrels to the Midwest, which is eating more heavy Canadian barrels, and then let's move anything extra to the Gulf Coast and get paid for that too. So how did they accomplish that? Mostly it was from this pipeline, Flanagan South pipeline. So this pipeline, and I'll pull up the flows. Let's go quarterly totals. You can see the rise from, let's say, almost 10 years ago, from 300,000 barrels a day to now pumping almost 700,000 barrels a day. So they've expanded this pipeline. They did an open season, I believe, last month for another 100,000 barrels a day on this line. And I think this is a 36-inch line, and typically Enbridge's 36-inch lines max out at around 800,000 barrels a day of heavy crude. So after that last 100,000, which they just open seasoned, I don't know if that was successful or not, imagine it was, but after this last 100,000 to get to 800,000 barrels per day, Flanagan South is probably maxed out. So this gives us a clue at why they're maybe teaming up with other egress options. Is their main artery down to the Gulf Coast, and that's Flanagan South, and that's the lease that they have on Seaway, and they also own 50% of Seaway. So they're able to touch this barrel and really capture almost all the revenue from this barrel all the way down to the Gulf Coast. But since Flanagan is filling up, they need to look for other options. So I'll switch Flanagan off here, and then we'll look at, I'll just read some stuff from what Bloomberg article had to say. They said this project will be a reconfiguration and upgrade of existing systems, as well as building a new segment. So that's interesting. And it says this is a response to industry demand for more shipping capacity from Flanagan. So Flanagan, Illinois is here, and this is where Flanagan South pipeline came off of. So this point here, it also says, and I mentioned it earlier, the project will entail constructing a new pipeline, and it says where it's coming to and from. It says from the Illinois hubs from Wood River and Patoka, connect Wood River and Patoka. Okay, and it also says it would take, let's see what it says here. It's going to take barrels off the main line. So I understand potentially taking barrels off the main line at Flanagan. So it definitely says that. That makes some sense if they're going to continue to optimize and make a little bit more space on the main line to bring more barrels into the Midwest. You will need to get those from Flanagan. That makes a lot of sense. I don't really understand the new segment from Wood River to Patoka. And it also says that the barrels would go to Patoka, and then it would go down ETCOP to the Gulf Coast. So this, let's try to piece this together, what they're trying to do here. So here's ETCOP from Patoka down to the Gulf Coast. We can see, hey, look, there's actually a lot of space here that they could actually shove barrels into. I have the capacity at 470. That's what Enbridge says the capacity is. This is largely a 30-inch line, so it probably can be expanded a little bit to get the 200,000 barrels a day if they needed the room for heavy. One option, which makes some sense, would be the Southern Access Extension. So this gap here would be filled by a pipeline that already exists. So this is also called the Illinois Extension Pipeline. So Enbridge owns 65% of this pipeline, MPLX owns 35%, and there is some space on it. So it's 300,000 barrels a day. I don't know if this can be expanded, potentially a little bit. I don't think it could probably go through a big expansion, but you have roughly 100,000 barrels a day, maybe a little bit less of open space on this pipeline. So that could be a solution for sure of getting the barrel from Flanagan to Patoka and then down ETCOP. The new segment from Wood River to Patoka, again, doesn't make a ton of sense unless they're trying to bring over volumes from Platte pipeline. So the Platte Express pipeline, might as well bring those up. These are also Enbridge pipelines. So these are taking barrels from the Hardisty area, Western Canada, down into the Rockies, and then over into the Wood River area. And if we look at the flows, there is space on this pipeline. You have to be a little bit careful here because there's a little bit of a telescoping issue on this pipeline where, first of all, Express is the larger diameter pipeline. So this is largely full up here. A little bit of space recently. But Express typically is run full. It leaves quite a bit of crude in Montana for some of these refineries. So that's why you see kind of the lower utilization down the line. So the part where they say they're going to make a connection between Wood River and Patoka probably only makes sense to me if they're planning on doing an expansion. They've said they're doing a 30,000 barrel a day expansion on this already and looking at potentially more expansions. That would make some sense to me. So you do maybe 100,000 barrels a day on the main line that's already going to go into Flanagan South. Maybe you do another 100,000 down the main line or 150,000 extra down the main line, and that would go down Southern Access Extension into ETCOP, and then you do maybe 50,000 barrels a day, and that gets you to your 200 on Express and Platte going into Wood River and then going across. The other thing I'm a little confused about is building a new segment between these 2 points seems a little strange to me. By my math and me looking at some of the flow dynamics, I think that there's actually open space between these 2 points on other pipelines that they could potentially take a lease out on or utilize. I would note Marathon has a pipeline. It's really owned by MPLX, but there's 2 lines here. It's tough to see, but there's 2 lines here. The capacities, they've recently expanded, not recently, but several years ago, expanded to 454,000 barrels a day. I can't see the flows on that pipeline. I would imagine that's actually probably relatively full. It's probably not completely full, and it's probably light oil going through that because that's likely taking oil that's coming across on their Ozark pipeline from Cushing. Let's uncheck that. So, but there is a pipe that Keystone does have a leg that comes this way, and this I can't see, and I'm gonna take Platte off. So now you're just seeing Keystone. I can't see the flows down Keystone on this Illinois leg, but they probably leave a bunch of oil at this Wood River refinery. So the leg that goes from here in Wood River to Patoka is 30 inches, and I would be stunned if this were highly utilized. I think that there's tons of space on this pipeline. Again, I can't prove it with flows, but I just think that most of the barrels are being left in Wood River. There's probably some that flow this way, but I think that there's lots of space here. So I think they'd be better off, and maybe it's something like Keystone or Keystone shippers want the optionality if this refinery goes offline to be able to move and store their barrels in Patoka, so they can't afford to lease it out or let anyone use it. But I do think that there's open space on this pipeline. So this is kind of what we're looking at here, and it might be useful if I just pull up. I just did a quick Excel spreadsheet of the actual toll rates. So if you look at the toll rates for something like Flanagan South, we're looking at the last open season for a long-term commitment was $8.54, and that gets you all the way from the Hardesty area. These are all apples to apples, Hardesty to the Gulf Coast. $8.54 gets you all the way from Western Canada to the Gulf Coast, to the Houston area, various Gulf Coast destinations. And again, as I mentioned before, Enbridge is owning 100% of that on the Mainline. They're owning 100% on Flanagan South, and they're owning 50% of the revenue on Seaway of that $8.54. I've estimated some of the actual rates for these expansions. Now, some of these can be discounted. So let's take the first one, the Mainline. The Mainline to let's call it the Chicago, Illinois area, Flanagan area. I actually did it to Flanagan. Is about $4.64. This can't be discounted. This is just based on the toll. So this $4.64 is going to be flat, and Enbridge would capture all of that. Southern Access, the Illinois extension that I showed on the map earlier, Enbridge owns 65% of that. That's going from Flanagan down to Patoka. The committed rates on that are $2.58 for heavy. I don't know if they can discount that. There may be a most favored nations clause in there that shippers have to where they can't actually offer a lower price, but this is a joint tariff from Western Canada. It may be viewed as a different type of service. It just depends on the wording of those contracts if they're able to discount this. Now, the good thing with ETCOP is ETCOP doesn't have local committed shippers. They have committed shippers on their joint tariff from the Bakken via DAPL, but they don't actually have a committed shippers that I can see on their tariff filings from Patoka down to the Gulf Coast. So ETCOP could potentially, this is their uncommitted rate. They don't have committed rates. They could potentially discount this rate to make it more in line with what Flanagan South is offering, that $8.54. So you could get some discounting potentially on Southern Access extension, Illinois extension, and most likely on ETCOP you could see some discounting there to make it competitive to what Flanagan South was offering. The other route via Express and Platte is a bit more expensive. The route on Express Platte from Western Canada to the Wood River area is about $6.75 via committed rates. And again, Enbridge would capture 100% of that. Wood River to Patoka, I estimated at $1.50 on a new build. Potentially they could do better than that if they did a lease, if that's possible, on Keystone or another pipeline. Again, I don't know if MPLX has space on theirs, and it's a light oil pipeline. And then you have ETCOP again, which they could discount. So probably a little bit more expensive for these routes versus something like Flanagan South. But still $8, maybe they could get close to $9 on a project to do that. And again, I put the ownership here so you can look and see what Enbridge is really trying to do and what Energy Transfer is trying to do. Enbridge, from their viewpoint, hey, we want to touch the barrel as much as possible. So they're going to do that previously by pushing it down their wholly owned pipelines and then a little bit down Seaway. In the future, they're going to have to settle to do some of their JVs. I don't think I mentioned it, but Enbridge does own part of the joint venture in ETCOP, so they are still using their assets to get the barrels down there. It's just a lower percentage of ownership and revenue that they're going to capture off of that. So I'll switch back to the map really quick here. I think it's worth mentioning. We talked about why this makes sense for Enbridge. Let me click off Keystone here. Makes sense from Enbridge because they are still touching the barrel a long ways down the pipeline. So we'll bring on Platte. So for an express Platte solution, they get all the revenue here, and then they get partial revenue via their interest in the JV on ETCOP all the way down to the Gulf Coast. For a mainline solution, they're getting 100% of the revenue all the way to Flanagan. Then they get 65% of the revenue down to Patoka, and then sharing in ETCOP all the way down. So what's interesting to me from an Enbridge standpoint is looking to find ways to still touch that barrel all the way down to the Gulf Coast. They're just going to get a lower percentage of the share of revenue doing that going forward now that Flanagan is filling up. For Energy Transfer, it's another project where they're trying to fill their unutilized space on pipelines with a growing basin. So this is a really smart move. It's nothing amazingly genius level 200 IQ stuff, but they realize that they have assets. DAPL's one of them, ETCOP's the other. They're both very much tied to the Bakken, which is a very mature basin at this point, and not growing that much, and potentially going into decline at some point in the future, depending on where oil prices are. You want your assets, your midstream assets, to be being fed by growing basins. So this again is another try. They tried it with Big Sky and South Bow. They want to tie their assets in with basins that are growing, and Western Canada is one of those basins. So I hope this was helpful. We'll see where this one goes. I was honestly a little bit more bullish for the Big Sky project. I thought that potentially had some economics that made a little bit more sense, was a little bit cheaper, but I do understand the execution risk of building new pipeline across the border, which that you would have to build significantly more pipeline for that project to come through. And given the history of building new pipelines in Canada and in the U.S. over the last decade, I can understand not wanting to take on that execution risk. One more point. We're talking Canadian egress projects. I don't know if I mentioned it during the video. I continue to think, and most of the market I think thinks this as well, that Trans Mountain's project, might as well just bring up Trans Mountain project, to the extent that they can do a pump station project, probably is the most economic project out there. The netbacks probably make the most sense. Certainly my back of the envelope math says the netbacks are better than any other project. They may have trouble offloading the barrel. There may be constraints at the ports here. So that's something that they're going to have to ensure investors or potential customers of this project, that they're going to be able to handle that. But if we were to put these projects side by side, I would say Trans Mountain still has the advantage, with the caveat that they would have to have some assurances that you can get your barrel out of the ports without congestion. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Reach out to us if you want to see different pipelines. We're continuing to plug away, getting stuff allocated, looking at new data sets, and I'll try to do more videos more frequently in the future. Thanks again for joining. Have a great day.